I woke up with ink pressed into my thumb, not a smudge, not something I brushed against in the dark. It sat deep in the lines of my skin like my hand had been used for something I didn't remember doing. I hadn't signed anything. I was certain of that. But the mark said otherwise, and it didn't feel accidental. I stood at the sink, running hot water over my hand, scrubbing harder than I should have. The skin turned pink, the ink barely faded. I stood there longer than I needed to. It didn't feel like something that just happened. That was when the thought settled in, quiet but firm. This wasn't something I'd done. It was something done to me. And if something had been signed, it hadn't been by choice. My name is Kathleen Morris. I'm 76 years old and I've lived in the same house in Maplebrook, Naperville for over 40 years. I know how things sit in this house. I know what belongs and what doesn't. So if you've ever had that moment when something small feels wrong but you can't explain why, tell me where you're watching from. Because that kind of feeling, it doesn't stay small for long. It started with the drawer under the sink. It was open. Not wide, just slightly pulled out. But I never leave it that way. Not halfway, not carelessly. I pushed it closed and stood there for a second longer than necessary, listening as if the house might correct itself. I don't leave things like that. Not halfway. It didn't. Everything looked the same. Sunlight across the floor, the kettle by the stove, the chair angled just the way I leave it, nothing out of place until you looked closely. I reached for my teacup. It wasn't where it should have been. Not gone. Not broken. Just placed on a different shelf. That bothered me more than if it had disappeared entirely. Things don't move in quiet houses without a reason. I took it down slowly, turning it in my hand. That was when I noticed the smell. Faint. Chemical. Not strong enough to alarm, but wrong enough to pause. It clung to the surface of the cup, subtle and persistent, like something that had already done its work and left behind only a trace. I didn't drink from it. I set it down and moved into the living room, more aware of my surroundings now than I had been all morning. The clock by the recliner blinked at me. 12 o'clock. It only resets when the power goes out, but the microwave in the kitchen still held the correct time. So did the radio on the side table. One clock had been disturbed, just one. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to place it, trying to remember if I'd unplugged it, if I'd done something without noticing. Nothing came back. That's the part people misunderstand about getting older. It's not that you forget everything. It's that you notice when something doesn't fit, and you can't always prove why. By then, I wasn't trying to convince myself anymore. I sat down slowly, pressing my thumb into the armrest, feeling where the ink had been darker before. Whoever pressed it had done it with intention, enough pressure to leave a clear mark, enough time for it to stay, enough certainty to make me question what I hadn't seen. I picked up the phone and called Maggie Lawson. She answered quickly. "Kathleen, Maggie," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Can I ask you something unusual?" A short pause. Then her tone shifted, grounded and attentive. "Go ahead. How long does ink stay on skin?" "That depends. What kind of ink?" "The kind that doesn't come off." Another pause. Longer this time. "What's going on?" I told her about my thumb. About the cup. The drawer. The clock. I didn't add meaning to it. I just gave her the pieces. She didn't dismiss it. "I'm coming over," she said. Maggie arrived within 20 minutes. Coat still, buttoned eyes, already scanning the room before she stepped fully inside. Years working in elder care had trained her to notice what others overlooked. "I'm not here to assume anything," she said gently. "I just want to check a few things." "That's all I want too," I replied. She moved through the house methodically. Doors first, then locks, then windows. No damage, no forced entry. Everything intact. Too intact. I followed her toward the kitchen, watching the way she tested each latch with her fingers instead of just looking. When she reached the window above the sink, she stopped. "Do you usually leave this unlocked?" she asked. My chest tightened. "No." She tested it again. The latch slid too easily. "This locks from the inside, right?" "Yes." Maggie didn't respond right away. She just looked at the frame, then back at me. Not alarmed. Not yet. But something in her expression had shifted. I stepped closer, placing my hand against the window as if touching it might give me a different answer. It didn't. The latch had been moved. From the inside. I stood there a second longer than I should have. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a mistake. And standing there with the morning light coming through that same window, I felt the last bit of doubt slip away. I hadn't done this, which meant someone had been inside my house while I slept. I didn't sleep that night. Not properly. I sat in the recliner with a blanket over my knees, the lights on, and the television muted. Every sound in the house felt sharper than usual. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the hallway clock. Even the wind against the siding seemed louder, like it had something to say. I kept my hands folded in my lap, thumbs pressed together as if I could still feel the ghost of that ink. Maggie stayed until nearly midnight. She didn't push me to call anyone. She didn't suggest anything dramatic. She just made tea, checked the locks again, and before she left, she said quietly, "If anything else feels off, you call me first. Not after." I nodded. After she went home, I locked the doors twice. I checked the window over the sink 3 separate times. Then I sat down again and waited for morning. By the time sunlight came through the curtains, I hadn't convinced myself of anything. Not that I was wrong, not that I was right. Just that something wasn't finished. 3 days passed like that. Small things, subtle things. Nothing as clear as the window, but enough to keep that feeling alive. A spoon left in the sink when I was sure I'd washed everything. A light in the hallway already on when I hadn't touched the switch. Once I found the back door not fully latched. Each time I paused, checked myself, replayed what I might have done without thinking. Each time I came up short. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to stay with me. And each time the feeling got closer, like whatever had happened wasn't finished yet. On the 4th morning, the letter arrived. It was tucked between a grocery flyer and a credit card offer, plain white envelope, official seal in the corner. I almost missed it, almost set it aside with the rest. But something about the weight of it made me stop. I opened it at the kitchen table. I almost didn't. It felt heavier than the rest of the mail. The paper inside was crisp, formal. The kind of document that doesn't waste words. Notice of recorded property transfer. I didn't turn the page right away. My hand stayed on the paper, fingers resting along the edge as if holding it in place would change what it said. The kitchen felt quieter than it should have been. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade for a moment. I read the line again, slower this time. Notice. A pause. Recorded. Another. Property transfer. Each word settled differently than the last. I let the paper fall flat against the table, smoothing it without thinking. The light from the window hit the page at an angle just enough to make the ink look darker. Permanent. I didn't need to read the rest to understand what it meant, but I did anyway, carefully, line by line, because whatever had been done had already been put into record. And that meant I wasn't looking at a warning. I was looking at something that had already happened. I read the line twice before it settled into place. Then I read it again. Transfer. Property. Recorded. This wasn't a warning. It meant it had already happened. My eyes moved down the page slowly, as if speed might distort what was written there. It listed an address, my address, Maplebrook, Naperville. It listed a date. Recent. Too recent. And then it listed a name. Vanessa Cole. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt, not enough to make me fall, just enough to shift my balance. Vanessa. My niece. I set the paper down carefully, flattening it against the table with both hands. There was no mention of error, no suggestion of mistake, just a confirmation that something had already been processed and entered into record. My house. Transferred. I stood up too quickly, the chair scraping against the floor behind me. The sound was sharp, jarring. It snapped something into place. This didn't feel like something I had forgotten. This wasn't a loose latch or a misplaced cup. This was something that had been done. I picked up my handbag, slid the letter inside, and reached for my keys. My hands were steady. That surprised me more than anything. I didn't call Maggie. I didn't sit down to think it through. I drove. The DuPage County Courthouse sat where it always had, solid, quiet, indifferent. I'd been there before years ago for paperwork after my husband passed. I remembered the smell of the place more than anything else. Paper, toner, old carpet that never quite loses its history. Inside it was the same. A receptionist sat behind the counter tapping at her phone. She looked up when I approached, her expression polite but distant. "Can I help you?" I took the letter out and placed it on the counter between us. "I received this," I said. "It says my property has been transferred." She glanced at the page, then back at me. "Residential, yes." She turned to her computer, fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I watched the screen reflect faintly in her glasses as she searched. "Name?" she asked. "Kathleen Morris." She nodded, typing it in. There was a brief pause, then her expression shifted just slightly. Not alarm, not surprise. Something closer to recognition. "Okay," she said slowly. "I'm seeing a recorded document here." My chest tightened. "Can you show me?" She hesitated for half a second, then turned the monitor toward me. There it was. A scanned document, clean and official. My address at the top. A formal heading. Legal language I didn't need to fully understand to grasp the meaning. Quitclaim deed. Transfer of ownership from Kathleen Morris to Vanessa Cole. My eyes moved lower. Signature. It was mine. Or close enough that someone who didn't know me wouldn't question it. The shape was right. The letters were right. But the way the line curved at the end, it was too sharp. Too forceful. I hadn't signed my name like that in years. And beneath it, my thumbprint. Black ink. Pressed clearly into the page. They didn't break in to take something from me. They used me to give it away. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The receptionist's voice came from somewhere to my left. "It looks like it was submitted with notarization and a witness. It's still in review, but it's already been recorded into the system." "Who submitted it?" I asked. She clicked again, scanning the entry. "Filed under Vanessa Cole." Of course it was. I stared at the document, trying to match it to any memory I had. Any moment I could point to and say, that's when this happened. There was nothing. No visit, no appointment, no conversation, only that faint chemical smell, the heavy sleep, the ink that wouldn't wash off. "This isn't right," I said quietly. The receptionist gave a small, careful shrug. "If you believe it was filed in error, you can request copies and file a dispute. I can print everything for you." "Yes," I said. "Print it." She nodded and turned to the printer behind her. I stood there watching the machine hum to life, page after page sliding out. Each one carried my name. Each one told the same story. A story I had never agreed to. She gathered the papers into a neat stack and handed them across the counter. "There's a small fee." I reached into my purse, paid without looking at the amount, and took the documents in both hands. They were heavier than I expected. Not physically, but in a way that settled somewhere deeper, somewhere harder to ignore. I stepped back from the counter, the noise of the courthouse filling in around me again. Voices, footsteps, distant doors opening and closing. Everything moved as if nothing had happened. But something had, and I was holding the proof. Not of a mistake, but of something planned. I didn't drive home right away. I sat in the courthouse parking lot with the documents in my lap, reading the first page again, then the second, then back to the first, as if the order might change what they meant. It didn't. The language stayed the same. Clear, final, recorded. My name at the top, my house beneath it, and a transfer I had never agreed to. I forced myself to slow down. Rushing wouldn't help me see what I had missed. Panic wouldn't help me read. And right now, reading was the only thing that mattered. When I finally drove back to Maplebrook, the house looked exactly as it had that morning. Still. Familiar. Unbothered by what I now knew had already been done. I let myself in and closed the door behind me with more care than usual. Then I carried the stack of papers to the dining table and spread them out one by one. Not quickly, carefully. If someone had taken something from me, I needed to understand how. The first page was the deed itself. Formal heading, legal phrasing that didn't leave room for interpretation, transfer of ownership, quitclaim, no compensation listed, a clean handoff from one name to another, from mine to Vanessa's. I moved to the next page. Supporting documents, filing details, dates and times that matched the notice I'd received. Everything aligned too neatly to be accidental. This wasn't a mistake. It was built to look like one. I traced the signature again, slower this time. The shape was right. The spacing was right. But the pressure wasn't. Whoever wrote it had pressed harder than I do, especially at the end. I always let the line taper. This one didn't. It dug in like someone trying too hard to be convincing. Then I looked at the thumbprint again. Even knowing it was there, it felt different now. More deliberate. More placed. I didn't touch it. I moved to the final page. Witness. That was the word that made me pause, because a signature could be forged, a thumbprint could be taken, but a witness meant someone had been present, someone had seen this happen, or believed they had. The name was printed clearly beneath the line. Robert Hensley. I sat back in the chair, repeating it quietly to myself. Bob. He lived 2 houses down. A quiet man. Kept to himself. We'd exchanged small conversations over the years, weather lawns, the usual things neighbors talk about when there's nothing else to say. He wouldn't be part of something like this. At least that's what I had always believed. At least I didn't think he would. But his name was on the page, and if it was real, if he had signed that line, then he had either seen me sign the document, or he had been told that he had. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, sliding them back into the envelope, not to hide them, just to keep them together. Then I stood. I didn't call him. I walked. The distance between our houses had never felt long before. That afternoon, it stretched. Each step gave me time to reconsider, to tell myself there could be another explanation, that his name might have been added without his knowledge, that this was just another layer of something I didn't fully understand yet. But by the time I reached his driveway, those thoughts had quieted. Not disappeared. Just stepped aside. I knocked once. There was movement inside. Slow. Measured. Then the door opened. Bob stood there, blinking slightly in the afternoon light. Kathleen, hi, Bob. Something in my voice must have told him this wasn't a passing visit. He opened the door a little wider. Everything all right. I need to ask you about something I said. It won't take long. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right. Come in. I stepped inside. His house smelled faintly of coffee and old wood, familiar in a distant way. We sat at the small table near the window, the same place I'd seen him sit 100 times before when I walked past. I didn't ease into it. I took the document from the envelope and placed it between us. Do you recognize this? I asked. He leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, scanning the page. At first, there was no reaction. Just focus. Then something shifted. Not panic. Not guilt. Confusion. Might, he said slowly. Where did you get this? It was filed with the county, I said. It says you witnessed it. He looked again more carefully this time. His finger hovered over the line where his name was printed. Then it dropped slightly, pointing to the signature beneath it. That looks like mine, he admitted. The words didn't land the way I expected. There was no confidence in them, no certainty. Just recognition without understanding. Do you remember signing it? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to pull something into focus that wouldn't quite settle. I remember Vanessa stopping by, he said after a moment. A few weeks ago, maybe. She said she needed a witness for some paperwork. Something about helping you organize things. My chest tightened. What paperwork? I asked. He shook his head. She didn't go into detail, just said it was routine. I didn't think much of it. He paused, looking down again. You weren't there. He paused longer than he needed to, like he was trying to remember something he didn't want to get wrong. The room seemed to shift again, just slightly. She said you had already signed everything he added, that she just needed someone to confirm it. I kept my voice steady. And you believed her. I didn't have a reason not to, he said quietly. She's your niece. That word again. Vanessa. I watched him for a moment longer, measuring the way he spoke, the way his hands rested on the table, open, unguarded. He wasn't lying. He was remembering, and what he remembered didn't match what had been done. She didn't ask you to verify anything I said. No, he replied. She just pointed to the line, said it was already taken care of. Taken care of. Something about the way he said that didn't sit right. It meant this hadn't just happened once. I looked back at the document between us. The signature, the thumbprint, the witness line. All of it built on the assumption that no one would question it, that no one would slow down long enough to see where it didn't fit. I gathered the paper back into the envelope, folding it carefully along the same lines it had held before. "Thank you for telling me," I said. Bob nodded, still unsettled. "Kathleen, is something wrong?" I met his eyes, holding his gaze just long enough to make sure he understood that this wasn't a misunderstanding. "Yes," I said quietly. Then I stood the envelope held firmly in my hand. Because now, for the first time, the shape of it was clear. This hadn't happened around me. It had been done through me. And I knew exactly who had made that possible. I didn't go back inside my house right away. I stood on the front step, the envelope still in my hand, feeling the weight of it in a way that had nothing to do with paper. The pieces had stopped shifting. They had settled into something that made sense. Vanessa hadn't needed me present. She had only needed me usable. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and walked straight to the phone. This time, I didn't call Maggie. I called the DuPage County Sheriff's Office. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment before dialing. The woman who answered kept her voice steady, professional. "DuPage County Sheriff's Office. How can I help you? I need to report something," I said. "It involves property fraud, and I believe I was used to sign documents without my knowledge." There was a brief pause, then the tone shifted, more focused now. "Are you safe where you are?" "Yes." "All right. Can you come in to speak with someone in person?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be there shortly." I hung up, took my coat, and left again before I could talk myself out of it. The sheriff's office sat farther from Maplebrook than the courthouse. The drive gave me time to think, but not in the way it had earlier. There was no more searching for explanations. Now I was placing them. By the time I arrived, I wasn't unsure anymore. I was steady. Inside, the building felt different from the courthouse. Less formal, more direct. The kind of place where people didn't come to confirm paperwork, they came because something had already gone wrong. A deputy at the front desk looked up as I approached. "Ma'am, I called earlier," I said, "about a possible fraud case." He nodded. "Have a seat. I'll let someone know." I sat down, the envelope resting in my lap again. I kept one hand on it, not out of fear it would disappear, but because it grounded me. After a few minutes, a man stepped out from the hallway to my right. Mid-50s, composed, the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice to be taken seriously. "Mrs. Morris?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm Sheriff Daniel Brooks. Why don't you come back with me?" His office was simple. Desk, 2 chairs, a file cabinet against the wall. Nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary. He gestured for me to sit. "Tell me what's going on." I placed the envelope on the desk, opened it, and slid the documents toward him. "My house has been transferred out of my name," I said. "I didn't authorize it, and I have reason to believe the paperwork was completed using my signature and my thumbprint without my consent." He didn't interrupt. He didn't react immediately. He just began reading. That made it easier to keep going. That more than anything told me I had come to the right place. I waited while he moved through each page, his eyes scanning the lines, occasionally stopping longer on certain sections, the signature, the witness, the notary. When he reached the thumbprint, he paused. Then he looked up at me. "Walk me through this from the beginning," he said. So I did. I told him about the morning I woke up with ink on my thumb, about the drawer, the cup, the smell, the clock, the window latch. I told him about the letter from the county, the courthouse, and the documents I had printed. Then I told him about Bob, how Vanessa had come to him, what she had said, what he had believed. Sheriff Brooks listened without rushing me. He didn't write much down at first. He just watched, measuring the consistency of what I said. When I finished, he leaned back slightly in his chair. "All right," he said. "There are a few things here." He tapped the top document lightly. "First, this deed has already been recorded. That means from a civil standpoint, the transfer exists on record. That doesn't mean it's valid. It just means it's been entered." I understand, I said. Second, he continued, if your signature and thumbprint were obtained without your consent, that crosses into criminal territory, forgery, potential fraud, and possibly elder financial exploitation depending on the circumstances. The words didn't shock me. They clarified things. What happens now? I asked. We start by opening a report, he said. I'll have a deputy take a formal statement. We'll document everything, timeline, individuals involved, any physical evidence you have. He glanced at my hand. Is the ink still visible? Faintly, I said, holding up my thumb. It was darker before. He studied it for a moment, then nodded. That's something. Something. Not proof yet, but not nothing. We'll also need to verify the notary listed on this document, he added. If the notarization is fraudulent, that strengthens your case significantly. I nodded again. Each step he outlined didn't overwhelm me. It narrowed things, made them structured, solvable. There's one more question, he said after a moment. I waited. Has anyone had regular access to you recently? Someone who could have been present in your home without raising concern? The answer came without hesitation. Yes. Who? My niece, I said. Vanessa Cole. He held my gaze for a second longer than before, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. All right, he said. We'll include her in the report. He reached for a form, sliding it toward himself, and began writing. Deputy Ruiz will take your full statement next, he said. After that, we'll start verifying the details, witness, notary, filing timeline. He paused briefly, then added, and Mrs. Morris, until we understand exactly how this was done, I'd recommend you be cautious. If someone was able to obtain your thumbprint without your awareness, that suggests close access. Close access. The words settled in quietly. Not a break-in, not a stranger. Something far more controlled than that. I stood after a moment gathering the documents again, though I knew copies were already being made. Thank you, I said. He nodded once. We'll be in touch. As I stepped back into the hallway, the building felt different than it had when I arrived, more defined, less uncertain. Because now, for the first time, this wasn't just something that had happened to me. It was something that had been recognized. And whatever Vanessa had built, it was no longer invisible. I drove straight from the sheriff's office to the Chase branch on Jefferson. I didn't stop at home. I didn't call Maggie. Sheriff Brooks's words stayed with me the entire drive. Close access. If Vanessa had been inside my house without raising concern, then whatever she had done hadn't been limited to paper. It had extended into my accounts. The bank looked the same as it always had. Glass doors, clean floors, the quiet efficiency of people who handled other people's money without ever touching it directly. I had been coming here for years. The tellers knew my name. The manager, Harold Bennett, had helped me set up my accounts after my husband passed. I stepped inside, feeling something shift again, not fear this time, but focus. This was something I could verify. Mrs. Morris, one of the tellers, said with a small smile. Good morning. Good morning, I replied. Is Mr. Bennett available? She nodded. Let me check. A few minutes later, Harold came out from behind the offices, adjusting his tie as he walked toward me. Kathleen. Everything all right, I need to review my accounts, I said. All of them. He studied my face for a second, then nodded. Come on back. His office was the same as I remembered. Neutral walls. A computer angled slightly away from the desk, a chair placed just close enough to suggest conversation, not distance. I sat down, placing my handbag beside me. What seems to be the issue, he asked. I believe someone has been acting on my behalf without my consent, I said, possibly with access to my financial information. His expression didn't change much, but his posture did, straighter, more alert. All right, he said. Let's take a look. He turned to his computer and began pulling up my accounts, checking balances, recent activity, transfers. Everything appeared normal. That was the part that bothered me the most. Too normal. No unusual withdrawals, he said after a moment. No large transfers. Everything here looks consistent with your history. I watched the screen, waiting for something to stand out. Then he clicked into another tab. Hold on, he said quietly. What is it? There's a note attached to your profile, he replied. Limited access authorization. My chest tightened. For who I asked. He read it carefully. Vanessa Cole. The name didn't surprise me, but seeing it there inside the system attached to my accounts felt different from hearing it out loud. What kind of access, I asked. Limited financial power of attorney, he said. It allows her to view accounts, communicate with the bank on your behalf, and assist with certain administrative requests. It does not allow her to transfer ownership of assets or withdraw funds without additional authorization. When was it added? He scrolled. Approximately 8 months ago. 8 months. I thought back, slowly, deliberately. Vanessa had started visiting more often around then, bringing groceries, offering to help organize paperwork, sitting at the kitchen table with folders spread out in front of her explaining things in a tone that made everything sound simpler than it was. I had signed things. But not this. I want it revoked, I said. I didn't hesitate when I said it. He didn't hesitate. We can do that immediately. I'll need your confirmation and a signature. He turned the screen slightly so I could review the authorization. The document appeared clean, official, structured in a way that made it look harmless. That was the point. I read it line by line. No mention of property, no mention of deeds, just access, visibility, convenience, enough to learn, enough to plan. I never gave her permission to act beyond basic assistance, I said. I understand, he replied. We'll remove her access now. He printed the revocation form and placed it in front of me. I took the pen from the desk, holding it for a second longer than necessary before writing my name. This time I watched every stroke, every curve, every line. When I finished, I set the pen down carefully. Harold took the document and processed it immediately. A few clicks, a confirmation screen. Then he nodded. It's done, he said. She no longer has access to your accounts. A small shift settled inside me, not relief. Control. If there have been any attempts to access your information recently, he added, we'll flag them, and I recommend updating your security settings as well. Do that, I said. He made the changes while I sat there watching the system adjust itself back in my favor. It was a quiet correction, but it mattered. When everything was finalized, he printed a summary and handed it to me. If you need anything else, you let me know. I will, I said, standing. As I stepped out of the office, the bank felt different than when I had entered, less neutral, more exposed, because now I understood something I hadn't fully seen before. Vanessa hadn't been guessing. She had been learning. I walked outside and stood by my car for a moment, the late afternoon light settling across the parking lot. Then I reached into my bag and took out my phone. I didn't scroll through contacts. I knew the number. It rang twice before she answered. Aunt Kathleen Vanessa's voice was light, almost warm. Everything okay? I didn't respond to the tone. I was at the bank, I said. There was a pause. Not long. But enough. Oh, she replied. Why, I revoked your access. Silence, then a small exhale on the other end. I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean. There was a pause on the line. Not long, just enough to notice. The power of attorney, I said. The one you've been using. Another pause. Longer this time. I was helping you, she said finally. You asked me to. I asked for help organizing papers, I replied. Not access to my accounts. You signed it, she said, her voice tightening slightly. Everything was done properly. The words settled between us. Done properly. I thought of the deed. The thumbprint. The witness. No, I said quietly. It wasn't. Her tone shifted then, not openly defensive. Not yet. But something beneath it hardened. You're overreacting, she said. If this is about the house, I didn't let her finish. You had no right, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The line went still. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said softer now, You don't understand how complicated these things are. I was trying to make it easier for you. Easier. The word felt hollow. I understand enough, I said. And this ends now. Another silence. Then, almost too calm, she replied, We'll talk about this later. Not if. Later. As if the conversation wasn't finished. As if she still had a place inside it. The call ended before I could respond. I sat there for a second after the call. That was the first time it felt like she wasn't just explaining things, she was trying to control them. I lowered the phone, slowly watching the screen go dark, because now it wasn't just suspicion, it wasn't just confirmation, it was something closer to proof. And whatever she had started, she wasn't ready to let go of it. I didn't call Maggie this time. I drove to her house. She opened the door before I knocked twice. One look at my face and she stepped aside without asking questions. "Come in." I didn't sit. "It's worse," I said. Her expression tightened, but she didn't interrupt. She waited. "They had access to my accounts," I continued. "A limited power of attorney. Vanessa set it up months ago. I revoked it." Maggie exhaled slowly. "All right. That tells us she wasn't guessing." "No," I said. "She wasn't." I handed her the copies from the courthouse. She scanned them quickly, stopping where I expected she would signature thumbprint witness, and finally the notary. "Susan Whitaker," she read. "Aurora. I want to find her," I said. Maggie nodded once. "Then we go now." Aurora wasn't far, but the drive felt longer than it should have. The further we moved from Maplebrook, the clearer things became, not emotionally, but structurally. Vanessa hadn't rushed this. She had built it, layer by layer. By the time we reached the small office listed under Susan Whitaker's name, the sun had shifted lower in the sky. The building was modest brick exterior, a narrow glass door, a small plaque by the entrance. Susan Whitaker, Notary Public. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and cleaning solution. A desk near the front, filing cabinets along the wall. Nothing elaborate. A woman looked up from behind the desk as we entered. Mid-50s, composed. The kind of presence that didn't need to assert itself to be taken seriously. "Can I help you?" she asked. I stepped forward, placing the document gently on the desk. "My name is Kathleen Morris," I said, "and I need to ask you about a notarization attached to this." She adjusted her glasses and pulled the paper closer. Her eyes moved quickly across the page, then slowed, then stopped. "That's my stamp," she said. My chest tightened slightly. "And the signature." She leaned in, studying it more closely. "That looks like mine," she said carefully. "But I don't recognize this document." Maggie stepped closer beside me. "What do you mean?" "I mean I didn't notarize this," Susan replied. Her voice remained calm, but there was no hesitation now. If I had, I would remember the signer, especially for something involving property transfer. She reached for a ledger on her desk and opened it, flipping through pages filled with neat, consistent entries. "I log every notarization," she said. "Date, time, identification, verified type of document." Her finger moved down the columns, then she looked up. "There's no record of this." I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. The words didn't hit like a shock. They landed like confirmation. "So, the stamp," I said. "Could have been copied," she replied. "Or reproduced. It happens, though not often." She glanced at the document again. "But this is a clear misuse." Maggie folded her arms slightly. "And the signature?" Susan shook her head. "It's close. Close enough to pass at a glance, but not mine." She tapped lightly near the bottom. "The pressure's wrong. I don't press that hard on the downstroke." I felt something settle deeper inside me. Not fear, not even anger. Structure. "This document has already been recorded with the county," I said. Susan's expression shifted then just slightly. "That complicates things. I've spoken to the sheriff," I added. "They've opened a report." She nodded. "Good, because this is fraud, not just civil criminal. Forgery, false notarization, potentially more depending on how it was submitted." Her words aligned with what Sheriff Brooks had said, but hearing them here inside the system that had been misused made it clearer. This wasn't a mistake. It was a process, built to look legitimate. "Would you be willing to provide a statement?" I asked. "Of course," she said without hesitation. "I can also provide a copy of my logbook entries for that date range. It will show there was no such notarization performed here." Maggie glanced at me briefly, then back to Susan. "That helps establish the timeline." "Yes," Susan said, "and it strengthens your case significantly." Case. The word no longer felt distant. I looked down at the document again. The stamp. The signature. The thumbprint. All of it assembled to create something that didn't exist, except it did, because it had been accepted. They didn't just fake one part, I said quietly. They built the whole thing, piece by piece, like it had always been the plan. Susan met my eyes. That's usually how it's done when someone expects scrutiny. There was no accusation in her tone, just fact. Maggie shifted slightly beside me, and they expected no one would look this closely. Or that it would be too late by the time anyone did, Susan added. Too late. The phrase lingered. I gathered the documents back into the envelope, sliding them together with more care than necessary, because now there was no space left for doubt, no room left for interpretation. Vanessa hadn't taken advantage of confusion. She had relied on it. And if you were sitting here looking at this with me, if you saw how easily something like this could be built around a person without them realizing, you'd probably ask the same question I did. How far would someone go if they thought you'd never push back because this wasn't just paperwork anymore? It was evidence, clear, structured, and finally visible. I thanked Susan for her time, and she nodded, already reaching for her phone. I'll prepare a statement for the sheriff, she said. They'll likely be in touch. Thank you, I replied. Maggie and I stepped outside into the fading light. The air felt cooler, now sharper against my skin. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Maggie said quietly, "This changes things." Yes, I said. It did. Because now the story Vanessa had built was beginning to collapse, not from emotion, not from confrontation, but from the simple act of being examined. And once something like that starts to come apart, it doesn't stop on its own. I looked back at the office for a brief second, then turned toward the car. Because whatever came next, it wouldn't stay contained for long. We didn't speak much on the drive back from Aurora. Maggie kept her eyes on the road, both hands steady on the wheel. I sat beside her, the envelope resting against my knees, feeling less like a question now and more like something defined. Forgery, false notarization, fraud. Words that belonged to systems, to reports, to courts, not to quiet houses on Maplebrook. When we pulled into my driveway, the first thing I noticed was the car, parked along the curb, black, clean, familiar. Vanessa's. Maggie slowed without saying anything. The engine idled for a second longer than necessary before she shifted into park. She's here, Maggie said quietly. I see that. Neither of us moved right away. The house looked the same as it had that morning, the same light through the windows, the same stillness from the outside, but something inside it had changed. I'm coming in with you, Maggie said. I nodded once. Yes. We stepped out together. The air felt different, heavier, though I couldn't say why. I walked up the front path, each step, deliberate, my hand steady as I reached for the door. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open. Vanessa was standing in the living room, not sitting, not waiting quietly, standing as if she had been moving through the house and had only just stopped when she heard us. She turned when the door opened. Aunt Kathleen, she said, her voice soft, almost relieved. I was hoping we could talk. Maggie stayed just behind me, close enough that I could feel her presence without turning. I stepped inside and closed the door behind us. We are going to talk, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I expected. Vanessa's eyes flicked briefly toward Maggie, then back to me. I didn't realize you'd have company. She's staying, I replied. Something in Vanessa's expression shifted, not outwardly, but just enough to register. This doesn't have to be a confrontation, she said. There's been a misunderstanding. She didn't deny it right away. That was the part that stayed with me. No, I said. There hasn't. I took the envelope from my bag and placed the documents on the table between us. I've been to the courthouse, I continued. I've spoken to the sheriff, and I've just come from the notary listed on this document. Vanessa didn't look down right away. She watched me instead, waiting, measuring. Then slowly she glanced at the papers. That's a lot to take in, she said carefully. You should have talked to me first. I am talking to you now. Her lips pressed together slightly, then relaxed. I was trying to help you, she said. You've been overwhelmed with paperwork for years. I stepped in to make things easier. By transferring my house into your name, her eyes held mine. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Silence stretched between us, not empty, but tight. Vanessa shifted her weight, her posture adjusting in a way that looked almost casual. But it wasn't. You signed documents, she said. More than once. You asked me to help organize them. I did not sign a deed, I replied. You may not remember it clearly, she said, her tone softening, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. The words landed differently than anything she had said before, not louder, but sharper. Maggie moved slightly behind me. I didn't turn, but I felt it. I kept my voice even. I remember what I sign. Vanessa's expression didn't change much, but her eyes did. A flicker, brief, controlled. You've been under a lot of stress, she said. It's natural for things to blur. There it was. Not an accusation. A suggestion. Carefully placed. I reached into the envelope again and pulled out the notarized page, setting it down in front of her. The notary did not sign this, I said. Her gaze dropped to the page, then lifted again just as quickly. That's not possible, she replied. It is, I said. There's no record of it, and she's prepared to state that formally. Another pause. This one longer. Vanessa's shoulders lowered slightly, as if something inside her had adjusted to a new calculation. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, she said. No, I replied. You already did that. The room felt smaller now, more contained. Maggie's presence behind me grounded the space, but this was no longer about support. This was about clarity. I have revoked your access to my accounts, I said. That got her attention. Not dramatic, not explosive, but real. You did what she asked. The power of attorney. I continued. It's been removed, as of this afternoon. Her jaw tightened slightly. You shouldn't have done that, she said. I should have done it sooner. Silence again. Then for the first time her tone shifted, not soft, not careful, but something closer to controlled irritation. You don't understand the position you're putting yourself in, she said. I held her gaze. No, I replied quietly. You don't understand yours. The words settled between us. Not loud, but final. Vanessa looked at me for a long second, then glanced at Maggie again as if reassessing the balance of the room. Fine, she said. If you want to handle everything yourself, then do that. But don't expect it to go smoothly. I'm not expecting anything from you, I said. She nodded once, a small contained movement. All right, she said. We'll see how this plays out. She turned then, moving toward the door with measured steps, not rushed, not hesitant. As she reached for the handle, she paused briefly. You're not as prepared as you think, she added without turning back. Then she opened the door and stepped outside. The sound of it closing behind her was softer than I expected. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet return, but it wasn't the same quiet. Not anymore. Maggie exhaled slowly behind me. She's not backing down. No, I said. I gathered the documents again, sliding them back into the envelope. She won't, I added, because now it wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what she believed she could still control, and that meant I needed to make sure she couldn't. Michael Grant's office sat on the second floor of a small building just off Washington Street. I had called ahead, explained enough to secure an appointment, not enough to explain everything. When Maggie and I walked in, the receptionist greeted us with a nod and directed us inside. Michael stood as we entered his office. Early 60s, composed with the kind of stillness that came from experience rather than restraint. Mrs. Morris, he said, please sit. I did. And then I told him everything, not rushed, not scattered. From the ink on my thumb to Vanessa walking out of my house. He listened the same way Sheriff Brooks had, without interruption, without assumption. When I finished, he folded his hands lightly on the desk. This is serious, he said. And you did the right thing coming in now. What can be done? I asked. Immediately, he said. We file for an injunction that will freeze the current status of the property and prevent any further transfers or actions while the case is reviewed. How long does that take? I can have it drafted today, he replied. Filed first thing tomorrow. I nodded once. Do it. He reached for a file, already beginning to organize the documents I had brought. We'll also prepare for a full civil challenge, he added, and coordinate with the sheriff's office on the criminal side. Everything was moving now, not quickly, but precisely, and for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was responding. Because whatever Vanessa had started, it was no longer hers to control. The letter arrived the next morning, not with the usual mail, not tucked between flyers or envelopes with printed addresses. It was placed directly on my front step, no stamp, no return address, just my name written across the front in a hand that tried to look careful. I noticed it before I opened the door. For a moment I stood there looking through the glass, not moving. The house was quiet behind me, the street outside still. Then I opened the door and picked it up. The paper felt thin, ordinary, but the way it had been left deliberate visible made it something else. I didn't open it right away. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and locked it. Then I carried it to the dining table and set it down next to the envelope that now held everything else. Maggie was already there, standing by the kitchen counter. She had come early before I even called. That was something she had started doing without asking. "What is it?" she asked. "I don't know yet." I sat down and opened the envelope. There was no greeting, no explanation, just a single line typed cleanly across the center of the page. "You should have left it alone." I read it once. Then I set it down and looked at it again. Then again. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I needed to feel where it landed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't detailed. It didn't need to be. It assumed I already knew what it meant. Maggie stepped closer. "What does it say?" I turned the paper toward her. Her eyes moved across the words, then lifted to meet mine. "That's not subtle?" "No," I said. "It isn't." She glanced toward the door. "Do you think she—" "Yes." I didn't let her finish, because there wasn't anyone else who needed me to stop. I folded the paper once neatly and placed it back inside its envelope, not to hide it, to keep it with the rest. "Sheriff Brooks will want to see this," Maggie said. "He will," I replied. "And he will." But I didn't reach for the phone. Not yet. Because something else had already started to shift. By the afternoon, it wasn't just between Vanessa and me anymore. People talk. They don't always mean to. Sometimes it's a question asked too casually, a comment made in passing, a concern that feels small enough to share, but it moves. It had started with Bob. He hadn't meant to spread anything. I knew that. But when someone realizes they've been part of something they don't understand, they don't keep it to themselves for long. By midday, Maggie had heard from someone at the pharmacy. By early afternoon, a neighbor across the street had knocked to ask if everything was all right. No one asked directly. They circled it. "Is everything okay at your place? Is Vanessa still helping you with things? Do you need anything?" I answered each one the same way. "I'm handling it." That was all I said, and it was enough. Not more, not less. But that was enough. Because the tone shifted. Subtly. People who had once spoken Vanessa's name casually now paused before saying it. Those who had seen her coming and going from my house began to reconsider what they had assumed those visits meant. It wasn't confrontation. It was distance. Maggie noticed it before I said anything. "They're pulling back from her," she said quietly that evening. "Yes," I replied. "And she'll notice." I know. Vanessa had relied on familiarity, on being seen as helpful, present, necessary. That kind of position doesn't disappear overnight, but it does begin to thin. Michael called just before 6. "The injunction is ready," he said. "We'll file first thing in the morning. That should prevent any further action on the property while this moves forward." And after that I asked. "We prepare," he replied. "You'll need to be ready for a hearing. The court will want to review the validity of the transfer, and the opposing side will have an opportunity to respond." Opposing side. The words sat differently now. Not theoretical. Defined. "I'll have everything ready," I said. "I know you will," he replied. After the call, I sat at the table again, the documents spread out in front of me. The deed, the notarization, the statement from Susan Whitaker already emailed and printed, the note from that morning. Each piece no longer stood alone. They connected, not loosely, directly. Maggie moved quietly through the kitchen behind me, preparing tea I hadn't asked for but didn't refuse. "You're steady," she said after a moment. "I have to be." She set the cup beside me. "Not everyone could do this." I looked down at the papers. "I didn't choose to," I said. "I just didn't ignore it." That was the difference. Not strength, attention. That night I checked the doors twice. Not out of fear, out of habit, reinforced by understanding. The window over the sink stayed locked. I tested it again before turning off the light. Then I stood there for a second longer than usual, looking out into the dark. Nothing moved. No car, no figure, no sound beyond the wind against the siding. But the house no longer felt unaware. It felt prepared. The next morning, everything moved forward. Michael filed the injunction. The sheriff's office confirmed they had received the additional documentation, including the note. Susan Whitaker's statement was added to the case file. Bob had agreed to provide a written account of what he remembered. Each step tightened the structure, made it harder to deny, harder to shift. Vanessa hadn't reached out again. Not by phone, not in person. But her absence didn't feel like retreat. It felt like waiting. And I understood that. Because once something like this moves into a courtroom, it stops being about what someone claims. It becomes about what can be shown. I gathered the documents once more, placing them carefully into the envelope that had become something more than storage. Then I set it down on the table and rested my hand over it briefly, not for reassurance, for confirmation, because everything was in place now, and whatever came next wouldn't be decided in private. The hearing was set for the following week. Michael called the night before to go over the details one last time, what to expect, how it would proceed, where I would sit when I would speak. His voice was calm, precise, the way it had been from the beginning. "This isn't a trial," he reminded me. "It's a hearing to determine the validity of the transfer and whether the injunction holds. The judge will review the evidence and decide how the case moves forward." "I understand," I said. "And Kathleen," he added, "when you speak, keep it clear, keep it simple. The facts are already strong. You don't need to force anything." "I won't." When I hung up, I didn't rehearse anything. There was nothing to prepare that hadn't already happened. The DuPage County Courthouse looked different that morning. Not physically, but in the way it held people. There were more of them. Conversations in low voices, papers carried carefully like each one meant something. Maggie walked beside me as we entered, her presence steady, unspoken. "You ready?" she asked quietly. "Yes." And I was. Not because I felt certain, because I understood what mattered. Michael met us near the courtroom doors, a folder already in his hand. "We'll go in shortly," he said. "They're just finishing the case before yours." He glanced at me briefly. "Everything is in order." I nodded. Across the hallway I saw her. Vanessa. She stood near the far wall, speaking with a man I didn't recognize, her attorney, I assumed. Her posture was composed, her expression controlled, as if this were simply another matter to be handled. When her eyes lifted and found mine, she didn't look away. She held my gaze. Not defiant, not apologetic. Measured. I didn't react. I didn't need to, because whatever existed between us now wasn't personal in the way it had once been. It was structural. The courtroom door opened. "Next case," someone called. Michael gestured lightly. "Let's go." Inside the room was quieter than I expected. Not empty, just contained. The judge sat elevated at the front, reviewing a file as we took our places. Michael directed me to sit beside him while Vanessa and her attorney moved to the opposite side. The distance between us wasn't large, but it was enough. The clerk called the case. Michael stood first, presenting the situation clearly. Property transfer executed via quitclaim deed alleged to be fraudulent due to forged notarization, unauthorized signature, and misuse of personal identification. No embellishment, just fact. Vanessa's attorney followed, framing it differently, suggesting confusion, possible consent, given under unclear circumstances, documentation that appeared valid at the time of filing. Words arranged to soften edges, to introduce doubt. Then the judge spoke. "Mrs. Morris," she said, looking directly at me, "I'd like to hear from you." Michael gave a small nod. I stood. For a second I could feel every eye in the room. The room felt still, not heavy, not pressing, just focused. I did not sign that document, I said. My voice didn't waver. I did not authorize anyone to sign on my behalf, and I did not appear before a notary for any transfer of my property. The judge listened without interruption. I continued. The first indication I had that anything had happened was when I received a notice from the county. Before that, there were only small signs, things out of place in my home, a mark on my hand I couldn't explain. I paused briefly, not for effect, but because it was part of the sequence. I later confirmed that the notary listed on the document did not perform the notarization. There is no record of it in her log, and the witness who signed the document was approached under the impression that the paperwork had already been completed. I didn't look at Vanessa. I didn't need to. This was not something I agreed to, I said. It was something constructed to appear as if I had. I sat down. Michael placed a hand lightly over the folder in front of him, a small acknowledgement. Vanessa's attorney rose again, calling her forward. She stood with the same composure she had held outside. Miss Cole, the attorney, began, "Can you explain your involvement in this transaction?" Vanessa didn't rush her answer. "My aunt asked me for help organizing her financial and legal documents," she said. "Over time, it became clear that managing her property would be easier if it were consolidated. She agreed to that." "Did she sign the deed?" "Yes." "Was the notarization legitimate?" "To my understanding, yes." Her tone was steady, practiced, but something beneath it didn't align. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Miss Cole, were you present when the notarization occurred?" Vanessa hesitated. "Not long, but long enough. I was coordinating the process," she said. "I may not have been physically present at every step." The words were careful, but they left space. "Then how do you account for the notary's statement that she did not perform this notarization?" the judge asked. Another pause. Vanessa's composure held, but it tightened. "I can't speak to her records," she said. "Only to what I was told at the time. What she was told, not what she saw, not what she confirmed." The distinction settled into the room quietly. Michael didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. The structure was already shifting. The judge reviewed the documents again, flipping through the pages with measured attention. "The court has before it conflicting accounts," she said finally. "However, the absence of a valid notarization combined with the testimony regarding the witness raises significant concerns about the integrity of this transfer." She closed the file. "I will be holding this matter under advisement," she continued. "The injunction will remain in place pending a final decision. Additional review of the evidence will be conducted. No ruling, not yet, but not dismissal either." Michael nodded slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." Vanessa's attorney did the same. The clerk called the next case, and just like that it was over. For now. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt louder than before. Voices returned. Movement resumed. Maggie touched my arm lightly. "You did exactly what you needed to." "I know," I said. Across the hall, Vanessa stood with her attorney again. This time she didn't look at me. Not once. Because whatever control she had relied on was no longer certain, and that uncertainty had finally reached her. The decision came 3 days later. Michael called in the early afternoon. I was sitting at the same kitchen table where everything had first started to unravel. "It's been ruled," he said. I didn't speak. "The court has invalidated the transfer. The deed is officially void. The property is fully restored to your name." I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of relief, but to let the weight of that settle into something real. "And Vanessa?" I asked. "There's been a criminal referral," he said. "Forgery, fraud, false notarization. It's out of our hands now, but the case is moving forward." "I understand." "And Kathleen," he added, "you handled this exactly the right way." I thanked him and ended the call. The house was quiet again. I noticed it right away, but this time it felt like mine. The paperwork followed over the next few days: revised title, updated records, formal confirmations. Each document said the same thing in a different way. The transfer had never been valid. I read every page carefully, not because I doubted it, because I had learned what happens when you don't. Sheriff Brooks called once more. The investigation was moving forward. Statements had been collected, evidence reviewed. Vanessa had not fully denied what happened, but she hadn't admitted it either. "She's trying to hold her position," he said. "She won't be able to," I replied. "No," he agreed. "She won't. Maggie came by that evening. She didn't knock. She never did anymore." "It's over," she said, setting a bag of groceries on the counter. "This part is," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "You're calm." "I am." "You're not angry," I thought about that. "I was," I said. "But anger doesn't fix structure." She nodded slowly, because she understood what I meant. A week later, I met with Michael again. Not about the case, about what came after. "I want everything protected," I said, clearly, permanently. He nodded. "Then we set it up so no one can move anything without your explicit control." We talked through the options. By the end of the meeting, it was decided. An irrevocable living trust. The house would remain secure. Ownership defined. Access controlled. Not dependent on assumption. Not vulnerable to interpretation. And then something else came up. "If you wanted to," Michael said, "you could extend this, use part of it to help others." I looked at him. "Women in situations like yours," he added, where control was taken quietly. I didn't answer right away, but I didn't dismiss it either. The documents were signed 2 days later. This time I watched my hand as I wrote my name. I didn't rush it. Not out of fear, out of awareness. Every line, every curve, every decision. I saw Vanessa one last time, not at my house, not in court, outside Michael's office. She was standing near the sidewalk when I stepped out. When she saw me, she stopped speaking. For a moment, neither of us moved. "I didn't think you'd go this far," she said. Her voice wasn't defensive, just quieter than before. "I didn't think you would either," I replied. She looked down briefly, then back up. "I was trying to fix things," she said. "In my own way." I didn't argue. Because whatever she believed, it didn't change what she had done. "There are ways to help people," I said. This wasn't one of them. She nodded. A small, contained movement. "I guess this is where it ends," she said. "Yes. Not with understanding, but with clarity." She stepped back, and this time she didn't look at me again. That night I sat in the living room with the lights low. The same chair, the same clock. Steady now. No blinking. No interruption. The house didn't feel different because it had been returned. It felt different because I had seen it clearly. And once you see something clearly, you don't go back to not knowing. Sometimes it's not the moment something is taken from you that changes your life. It's the moment you decide it won't stay that way. If someone used your trust to take something that mattered to you, would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or fight to take it back? Be honest, I really want to know which one you'd choose and why. And if this story stayed with you, you can like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow for more.